Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming and joining us for the learning of Torah Hashem, the Ezras Hashem Yisbach. As always, we begin with Hakaras HaTov to TorahAnytime.com for giving us a glorious platform to teach Torah all over the world, and likewise to Kol Loshen for its global network, to our listeners and viewers on YouTube, on Facebook, on Torah Communications Network, our Zoomers, our subscribers, and everyone here in our flagship station here at the Aguda Yisrael Bezev of Fairways, Lakewood. Tonight we have a very special sponsorship. We're sponsored by our very own Mispalel here in Fairways, in the Aguda of Fairways, and Chover Hadaf, Berish Gesseman and family, and they're sponsoring the Shiur tonight in the schus of their grandson's bar mitzvah. Their grandson, Nosson Gesseman, Nosson ben Yosef, he should grow up to be a Talmid Chacham, a Yoresh Shemayim. He should be a happy young man with Simchas Achayim. He should have Atzlacha in Ruchnias and Gashmias and be a source of nachas to his wonderful family. We just found out that my good friend Shimon Klein, who is a dedicated Daf Yomi Zoomer, fell down steps in the Woodridge Shul and has to have an operation. He had one on one shoulder. He has to have an operation on another shoulder. So we're going to also dedicate the Shiur to Shimon Yehuda ben Gittel. He should have a refuah shalema b'seich shar chayil Yisrael. Ach ba'Hashem al timroidu. Don't rebel against Hashem. The 600,000 Jews in the Midbar, people of unparalleled quality. This was the elite of Judaism. They were called the Dor Deya, the generation of knowledge. They all learned personally from Moshe Rabbeinu. It was the greatest kollel in the history of mankind. Nobody had to work. They got man. They got Be'er Shel Miriam. They were fueled by heaven. They lived under the Adonai HaKavod. They weren't busy with business. They weren't distracted. And this generation lost their lives because of the sin of Lashon Hara. So this Parsha really should sear into our hearts and into our minds how deadly is the sin of talking about other people. Like it says, Hamaves v'achayim b'yad halashon. Death and life is in the hands of the tongue. And that's why 3 times a day, the only thing that we ask for divine assistance, the 613 mitzvahs, the only thing we ask for is a L'kai nitzah l'shayni meira. Please Hashem, help that I shouldn't talk bad. That's just ruinous. And the Chavetz Chaim says that that's why only after we say do we say Psachli bi b'sarasecha, open my heart to your Torah, because the Chavetz Chaim says really bluntly that learning Torah with a mouth that speaks Lashon Hara isn't worth much at all. Learning Torah with a filthy mouth, with a ugly mouth, sullies the Torah. It's not a good thing at all. The Chavetz Chaim had a very chashuv son by the name of Rev Leib, Zecher Tzadik V'Racha Schus Yagan Aleinu, and he gave a revelation. We know that the Chavetz Chaim, who of course wrote the Mishnah Brura, Chavetz Chaim was the Gadol Hador, he gives a revelation of why the Chofetz Chaim dedicated himself to writing the Sefer of Chofetz Chaim and Shmiras HaLashon. That was like, he's known after that. There's so many mitzvahs. There's shatnez, there's brachas, there's so many mitzvahs, Why did he dedicate his life to writing about Lashon Hara? So Rebbe Leib reveals that when the Chofetz Chaim was 24 years old, in his town there was a very choshev, a pious Rav, who was a big guy. Sadly, today, it's, something that's so matter of fact, but sadly, his children started to go a little bit off the derech. We wouldn't call it nowadays off the derech, but his children started to go a little bit off the derech. And what did some of the congregants do? They quoted the Gemara in Sukkah that says, Shusa de beyanuka o davu o deime, that the speech of a child is either from the father or from the mother. And therefore, if these children are starting to talk this way, it must be they see it at home, and they started murmuring about the rabbi. And when you start murmuring about the rabbi, it builds up its own steam, especially if there are people that the rabbi has to give mussar to, so they don't particularly like the rabbi. And it started getting a life of its own until he had to pick himself up and leave the town. They drove him out of the town. The nearby town was a town of Hasidim. And they welcomed the Rav's family extremely warmly. And the Rav's children had a very good chemistry with the Hasidim. And they started to come back. And they came fully back to Yiddishkeit. So the Chofetz Chaim said, when he saw what happened to this Rav, how this pious gaon of a Rav was embarrassed and driven away from his shul because of the unfair talk of the people, he realized how terrible are the consequences of talking about people, how you could get them to lose their jobs, to lose their life, to lose their reputation. So he wrote about it. And then the Chofetz Chaim said that he learned another thing. It's the great Chofetz Chaim. Chofetz Chaim says he learned that sometimes in life, things that people consider, in the words of the Chofetz Chaim, things that people consider Seifa Olam, it's the end of the world, turns out to be the best thing for them. And they thought it was the end of the world, that he lost his shtella, he had to move to another city. But in the city that he was living on, his children were deteriorating. They moved to, after all, what's more important than the children? As Amaleinu Elo Abanim, our whole work is our children. In the new city that they moved in with the Hasidim, the children were resurrected. So a lot of times a person thinks, it's a big lesson for life. A lot of times a person thinks that it's the end of the world, but Elikim Chashava L'Taiva, those are the words of the Chofetz Chaim. But Hashem considers it for the good. Many times I've mentioned this, but I can never mention it enough. The Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says that this was exactly the case when he was in Europe right before the Inferno, right before the Nazi Inferno. He was a young, great Talmid Chacham. He was known as an Ilui, known as a prodigy. And there was a very promising shteller in a town called Tzitevyan. This is in the Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky biography. If you didn't get it yet, you should get it. So he was in the town of Tzitevyan, he applied for the Stelle in Sitivyan, and it was almost sure that he had a lock on it. And it would come with a big upgrade for the family. They would get a house, and they would get a parnasa. The last minute, someone else beat him out, and he didn't get it. And Yaakov Kamenetsky said in his own language that it was Tisha B'Av in Shtib. It was like Tisha B'Av in the house. Now they didn't have a parnasa, they didn't have a good place to live. Yaakov said that because of that, he was offered a position in far away Toronto, and he remembers that he went there, and they had an odd thing, that after they gave a prober and everything was to their liking, they had a top hat of the previous Rav. And if the top hat fit, so then he got the position. And the top hat fit. Toronto loved him and would pay to bring his family over with visas and everything. He said the Rav that became, unfortunately, the Rav that became Rav in Sitivyan, with the entire Kehillah went to the gas chambers. But he and his wife were safe. So he remembers vividly that they thought that it was Seif Ha'olam, it was the end of the world, he didn't get the Shtella. But Hashem chashava l'teiva. Hashem figured it for good. I could reminisce a little personally that my first Rebbetzin, Mim Liba Bas Rebar, Zechet Tzedekes of Racha, Schusi Yogan Aleinu, passed away 7 years ago. The year after, when I was in Avelis, the Shul made a dinner, my Shul made a dinner in her memory. They raised a pretty nice amount of money. And then that summer, the Shul told me, they had a meeting with me, the board of directors, and they told me that they're not going to be able to pay me anymore. After 38 years, they're not going to be able to pay me anymore. Maybe they'll try to continue giving me a medical policy. They'll try. And the money that they raised from the shul, they needed to take a lot of that money and use it to fix the air conditioning in the shul. So you understand that after 38 years, and I pretty much built the building, that I wasn't feeling very happy. Wasn't feeling very happy. But the bottom line is Elikim chashav l'taiva. Hashem saw that it was good. On my own, it would be very hard to leave a shul of 38 years. But here I come to a city where between me and my new Rebbetzin in Shashi, we have 8 married children living right next to us. We don't have any married children in Staten Island. And I have a shul, B'li Ayin Hara, that's thriving and growing every day. So this is an example of what a person thinks is Seifa Olam, it's the end of the world. But Elikim chashav l'taiva. I will take a few moments to give advice to young Rabbanim and to their constituents. One day you might want to retire. And if you've given yourself to a shul for decades, it's likely that a lot of the people that you were Meiser Nefesh for are not alive anymore, or have moved away. And a lot of the new people don't have a full grasp of what the rabbi has done. A rabbi has to protect himself. The first word of advice that I will give is a rabbi should never come in and live in a house owned by the shul. At first that sounds very, very exciting. Shul is providing a house. But if I didn't have my own house, which over the 38 years I owned and was able to sell, I wouldn't be able to start over somewhere else. Imagine if I lived in a shul's house, and then they told me, Rabbi, you have to move out because we got to get the new rabbi to live there. I would be leaving with nothing. And I know this happened to Rabbanim. They told him, okay, Rabbi, you're old. You could be Rabbi Emeritus, but we need a house. We need a house for the next rabbi. And he doesn't have money. He doesn't have where to live. He finds himself a homeless rabbi. And many times, a shul doesn't have money. That's what happened to my shul. My shul, they don't have money. A rabbi also has to protect himself clearly for ways to have a pension. And you can't assume that people will want to do something. You can't assume it. So the rabbi has to make sure that they put away money. Maybe he'll put away money too towards it to develop for himself some kind of a future. Now we have an incredible Bala Aguda. I'm telling you, this Bala Aguda is an eye-opener. It says, "B'mispar hayomim asher tartem es haaretz arba'im yom." For the number of days that they spied the land, Yom l'shana, a year for each day. Tisu avnei seichem, you're going to have to bear the sin and wander in the desert, arba'im shana, 40 years. So the spies spied for 40 days, so they paid for it to wander in the desert 40 years. The Bala Aguda asks, where do we see such a computation that for every day you get punished a year? We hope that's not the case. Here's a person. Let's say somebody would be foolish enough. Tomorrow night we're starting Bav Basra. Let's say somebody would be foolish enough to look at some debate instead of coming to learn. Somebody would be cuckoo. And could you imagine if the Rebbeinu Shalom would say, for that I'm going to punish you a year for that day? Can you imagine what it would be? I'm not saying that anybody that's listening to the Shiur would be so stupid. But, I'm just, if there's somebody out there, that chances upon this when they're, scrolling and they heard this, right? But the Bala Aguda, the Heilige Bala Aguda says, Ochen vei, if Hashem punishes everybody for one day, you have an off day. You punish a year for a day. Says the Aguda, you're learning the whole pasuk wrong. I'm telling you, it's such an eye-opener. He says, for every day that the Meraglim were spying in Eretz Yisrael, the Yidden knew that they were in mortal danger. I mean, they were walking around giants. You know, it says that one of the daughters of the giant was eating a peach. And she threw down the shell of the peach. And it was so big that it looked like a cave. And all 12 of them entered into the shell. And then the girl didn't want her father to see that she took a peach without asking, so she picked up the shell and threw it over the fence. And all 12 of them went hurling over the fence. Living there for 40 days was very scary. You know, when we went in, you know, we went in with miracles, you know. But it was really scary. So it's the Aguda said that we davened, we said tefillas for the spies for 40 days. And Hashem rewarded for each day of davening for the spies, Hashem rewarded them a year. And that's why they got 40 years living in the Midbar, learning Torah with Moshe Rabbeinu, getting the mun, getting the miraculous Be'er Shel Miriam, getting their clothes done. They stuck up the clothes and it was washed in the Ananiah covered, that the Raglacha Loivatzeka, their feet didn't swell, their clothing grew with them, and all these miracles. That because they davened 40 days for the Meraglim, for their safety, they got a year reward for every day they davened. I mean, you look at this and say, wow, I never learned the pasuk that way. But you know what this means? We come after davening and we say Shea Malas for the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. You know what reward there is for us that we're saying? You know, many years ago, we have a Zoomer. I don't think he's on tonight yet, or maybe he's just not showing himself. But we have a Zoomer, a dear mispal of mine. He was a Parnas. He was a president of my Shul 1 year in the Aguda. He's one of our Zoomers, Richard Rosenzweig. I was by his son Mishan's bris. He sent me a picture. Mishan just finished a secret mission in Rafah to assassinate a top Hamas. This is a boy that I was by his bris. He's 26 years old. He's a kid. Now he's in the north, in harm's way. You know how much we have to daven? You know how many children? These are kids. They're in such harm's way. And now with Hezbollah, it's frightening what the forces they could bring against our families that are right near the border. It's davening every day. We see that they got a year for every day they daven for 12 people. We're not davening for 12 people. We're davening for the safety of millions of our brothers and sisters. You know what the reward we get when we say in Shmoneh Esrei v'hazeidim, those that are willful, meheira, hurry, sa'aker, let them be uprooted, sishaber, let them be broken, samager, let them be pulverized, v'sashpilem, let them be humiliated, b'meheira v'yameinu. V'choleivecha meheira yikaresu. We get a lot of schus for that. When we say in in our Shemona Esrei, Sim Shalom and Shalom Rav, when we say on Shabbos in Yom Kippur, we say, "V'sishtevzvon," save us, right? Mikol oka, from any mishap, or mikol marin bishin, and any bad happening. Hashem rewards a year for each day. That's a balakeda. But we shouldn't, unfortunately, when you say Tillim all the time after davening, it becomes almost robotic. I was thinking about hanging up somewhere a picture of some of these young children. We don't hang it up in the shul, but maybe outside of the shul. People should see what we're davening for. The Avdi Kalev, I serve in Kalev. Ekev hoyseruach acheres imay. Because my servant Kalev, he had a different spirit than the 10 wicked meraglim. Vayamali acharai. I'm going to be va'aviosav el haaretz. The pasuk continues to say that he was awarded the great city of Hebron. Now you have to realize, what was he rewarded for? He tried to quiet the people. He failed. He failed. He failed. They cried a bechia shel chinam, and they all died in the desert. He failed. But he was rewarded the great city of Hebron, because we get rewarded for trying. That's a big lesson. That's a fundamental principle. There are a lot of times that people don't get involved, they don't say anything because they say, what's it going to help? Kalev tried, it didn't help. But he was rewarded magnificently with the great city of Hebron. He entered Eretz Yisrael. He wasn't a young man. He was the husband of Miriam. As a matter of fact, there's a beautiful vart. I'll say this as an aside. There's a beautiful vart from the Gadol Adar of El Yashiv. It says, "Avdi Kalev ekev ha'seruach acheres imay." So what gave Kalev the strength to stand up against the 10 meraglim? Kalev. The 10 meraglim were from the greatest people of their time. And it's 10 of them. And they had their own computations. They felt that Klal Yisrael, they just sinned with the Egel Azav. They don't have the merit. They don't have the merit to beat these giants. They didn't question Hashem's strength. You have to understand, he was with great people. It says that when Kalev and Yeshua, they wanted to stone Kalev and Yeshua. Stone Kalev and Yeshua. Yeshua, everybody knows that Yeshua was the prime Talmud, the prodigy, the prime Talmud of Moshe Rabbeinu. You want to stone Kalev and Yeshua? They felt that Kalev and Yeshua were right for him. They felt that Kalev and Yeshua were going to put Klal Yisrael into grave danger. They felt Klal Yisrael, okay, whatever their mistake cost them their life. But anyway, where did Kalev have the strength? So Rabbi Yoshev says the Ruach HaCheres was he was married to Miriam. And he enjoyed the wisdom of Miriam. Remember, Miriam said when she was 6, told her father, Father, what you're doing is worse than Paro. By separating and telling people to separate from their wives, you're not stopping only the boys, you're stopping the girls. You're not just taking them away from this world, you're taking them away from the next world. So, the Ruach HaCheres, says Rabbi Yoshev, was a wife. You listen, the Gemara says, Ishtecha gutza, even if your wife is short, gochin v'lochishla. Bend down and whisper with her. A wife A lot of times a wife could be a reason the next world a person gets amazing reward for tzedakah. And he gave a lot of tzedakah because his wife pushed him. He says, we should give more tzedakah. A wife could be that ruach hacheres. But anyway, that's not what I want to talk about. By the way, I also wanted to say, this is something I thought of me, you know me with words. I see different combinations of letters. So it could be that he got Chevron, because Chevron, Ches, Veis, Reish, Vav, Nun, is the same letters as Chavreinu, our colleagues. It could be he got Chevron because of his battle with his colleagues. And that he didn't step down. He didn't let himself be swayed. Now, why? We know that Yeshua also stayed loyal to Hashem and to Moshe. Why didn't Yeshua speak up? So it's interesting that the Arizal says, and later it seems to be that the Sfas Emes didn't know that the Arizal said it, but great people think in kind. Remember we said last week that Eldad Umeidad prophesied, right? Unlike Moshe Rabbeinu, who prophesied that 70 is a Canaan, prophesied through Moshe Rabbeinu as the Nevuah filtered through Moshe Rabbeinu. Eldad Umeidad prophesied independently. Eldad Umeidad misnabed mamachan, and they had a succinct, chilling Nevuah. Moshe Meis, Yeshua Machnas. Moshe is going to die and Yeshua is going to take him into Israel. That's Pshat. Misnabim, Meis Neviim. The head of the Neviim is going to die. Says the Arizal, says the Sfas Emes, that's why Yeshua didn't argue. Because if he would argue, they would say, he's doing it l'kfeid atzma. The elder Meidad prophesied that he's going to be the leader. So of course he wants to go into Eretz Yisrael. That's why, and as a matter of fact, there's a fascinating chidah. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for his Talmud, and he added an extra letter to his name. That's why it was Hoshea ben Nun, and they added, Moshe Rabbeinu added a Yud to make it Yeshua, because the Yud Hey is Ka Hoshiacha Me'atzas Meraglim. So why did Moshe Rabbeinu pray for him? So the Chidah says that Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid that Yeshua might be swayed to agree not to go into Eretz Yisrael, so that Moshe Rabbeinu shouldn't die. Because it says Moshe Meis Yeshua Machmas. And he didn't want him to hold back from going into Eretz Yisrael to save his Rebbe's life. So he prayed, it's interesting, the Targum Yonis Ben Uziel over here says that Kishachama, Kad Chama, Moshe and Visinusei de Yeshua. When Moshe saw the humility of Yeshua, he said, so the Reb Chaim Kanievsky, in his Time of the Kra, says simple pshat in the Targum Yonis Ben Uziel that Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid that Yeshua would not stand up against the Meraglim because of his humility. It says that the Meraglim, the Nesiim, were mentioned in order of greatness. So Yeshua was number 5. So that means he was only number 5 in order of greatness. So Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid that he wouldn't argue because he would feel humble. So when he saw his humility, he said, L'maisa is, there's a famous pshat. Many of you heard this pshat from me other years, but for those that didn't hear it, it's a famous pshat The base Aaron says this pshat. The base Aaron says that it's a fact that by Tchias HaMesim, a person is going to be resurrected alphabetically by their names. So a person that has a name, Aaron, will be resurrected before Binyamin. And Binyamin will be resurrected before God, and God will be resurrected before Doniah. So, therefore, it's a question, how could Moshe Rabbeinu add a Yud to Yeshua's name? He's causing him to get resurrected later. Says it was Hoshea would have been much earlier than Yeshua. So he brings down a Mabit, that the Mabit says that, but the first ones that will get resurrected are the Anovim, are the humble people. So he said that's what the Targum Yonasim Ben Ezil means. Kad Chama Moshe, when Moshe saw that Yeshua is an Anav, that's why he was able to add a Yud. Because it's not going to detract from him, because he's humble. I also thought, by the way, just as an aside, I thought that that's probably why when adding a name to somebody that's sick, a lot of times they add either Alter or Alta, whether it's a man or a woman, right? So sometimes they add Chaim, sometimes they add Raphael, but a lot of times they add Alter or Alta. So it could be it became the custom to, once you're adding already, add it with an Aleph. That'll get at least the first crack at Tchias HaMesim. Be that it may, I got a little bit sidetracked over here. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu added a Yud. Where did he get the Yud from? So we know that when Avram Avinu, when Hashem changed Sarai's name to Sarah, right? So when he changed Sarai's name to Sarah, so he took the Yud from Sarai and he gave it to Yeshua. Right? And Sarah became Sarah. The question that I always had is, why when Hashem changed Sarah's name, why did he take away the Yud? Moshe Rabbeinu didn't take anything away from Moshe. Just added a Yud. You know, the Rabbeinu Shalom could have taken Sarai and add a Hey and make a great name. Shira. Great name. And not only that, but if you, like me, see jumbles very easily, what other word does Shira spell? Yeshara. Perfect one. Upright one. That's perfect! Now, okay, you can say, Rabbi Weiss, but you have to understand, like Rashi brings down from Brachas Daf Yud Gimel, that until now she was only Sarai to Avram, a princess to Avram. Now she'll be Sarah to the whole world. So okay, that wouldn't work with the Yud. But it would be Yeshara. It's interesting, I wonder the rejection of the name Shira. I always wondered, Reb Chaim Kanievsky didn't like the name Shira. If people came with a problem, we had this in Staten Island, one family, was a girl that was having difficulties, and they went to Reb Chaim, and Reb Chaim said not to use the name Shira, to take a different name, because there's no place in the Torah where the name is Shira is found. Fact of the matter is, I always wondered about it. There's a lot of names that are not in the Torah. Gittel is not in the Torah. You know, there's a lot of names that are not in the Torah. You know, so I was always wondering if it was because Shira was rejected as a possibility for Sarah. But be that it may, we see over here that Kalei was Meiser Nefesh for a mitzvah, even though he didn't accomplish what he set out to accomplish. I mean, we could say, doesn't say it anywhere, but we could say that the younger generation heard Kalev's Musar, and maybe later on it helped, many years later. But he failed. They all died in the desert. He failed. But it was Nemeis Nefesh. They were going to stone him. So I picked up, by me, Svarm store is like a candy store. And in my last visit to Judaica Plaza, I found a gem. I found a new sefer called Sus Imrasecha. So in the Sus Imrasecha, he brings down from a famous sefer, Vovei Ha'amudim. Rabbi Frand, I see, quotes this sefer a lot. Brings down a fascinating story about Mesiris Nefesh for a good deed. He says there was a very, very wealthy man in Eretz Yisrael. And he told over to a rabbi, he says, I want to tell you the source of my wealth. My father emigrated from Russia, penniless. We lived here, b'dachkas gadol, with terrible poverty. But he said my father had one thing that he was very makpid on. The Gemara says a lot of times, tasily I should get reward. Sometimes people have something that they're very, very careful with. So my father was very careful to always try to make a shechiyanu on a new peri. And if he found in the Arab market, an Arab shuk, that there was some kind of a new peri, he would pay mamish whatever he could to get the new peri to make a shechiyanu. Interesting thing to be makpan on. So he says he remembers that his father was walking through the Arab shuk and he saw a really unique and exotic fruit. So he ran over and the man said, yes, this is imported from who knows where. He says, you got to sell it to me. So he says, why should I sell it to you? I'm a very wealthy man. Why should I part with such a gem? I don't need the money. And who knows why? Hashem knows why. But this Arab guy tells him, you see over there on the shelf, those bottles of honey? Nobody knows this. But under the honey, that's where I hide my golden coins. And look, you see those hundreds of bottles of honey? It's camouflage. Underneath them are golden coins. Anyway, they haggle back and forth. Arab likes good haggling, good bargaining. He ended up selling him the peri, and the man went home so happy, making a shechiyanu, vigiyanu, The next day he comes back in the market. He passes by the store, and he sees the children of this Arab in a frenzy. He say, what happened? What's the matter? He said, our father died from a massive heart attack suddenly last night, and we're trying to liquidate the store. So he says, what are you selling? Everything. So he says, hold on, let me get money. He borrows a few hundred shkalim, and he buys all the honey. He gets home, and there's so many gold coins that his family became from the wealthiest families. See what happens when you're Meiser Nefesh for something? Now I want to talk about this Mesiris Nefesh for Shechiyanu. I always, when I say Shechiyanu by Yom Tov, When I say Shechianu on Chanukah, especially the Shechianu that we say on Yom Kippur, it's mamish such a remarkable bracha. Shechianu, that you give us life, v'kiyamanu, and establish us. V'higiyanu, and we reached lazman hazeh. You know, I remember vividly making a Shechianu on the Shavuos after that period of COVID. I shut down my shul the day after Purim, and we were closed through Shavuos. And I remember making a Shechianu and saying, how many people are gone? If you remember, there were mobile morgues in front of Maimonides Hospital, mobile morgues. There were so many burials on a Friday that they had to keep over Mesim over Shabbos because they just didn't have enough time to bury all the dead bodies. Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. I remember certain Shechianus. I remember my president in my shul for several decades, Shmuel Leifer, was on the 63rd floor of the first tower, 9/11. And he made it down the stairs. As soon as the plane hit the first tower, they were telling people to stay in their offices. He hit the steps and he was downstairs before the second plane hit. And even then he told me he had no idea that the building would come down. He could have gotten caught in the building. When he made the Shechianu after Kol Nidre, he davened Kol Nidre by us in Shul. That was a Shechianu. I remember my first Rebbetzin towards the end of her life was Erev Chanukah. Hatzalah came, she couldn't breathe. They wanted to take her into the ambulance, but they said that they were going to do a trach in the ambulance. I said, no, she can't survive a trach. So I told her, you got to take her out of the ambulance. They said, you want us to take a woman that's not breathing out of the ambulance? And remember, we called Central Hatzalah, and they called Reb Ruvain Feinstein. They said that they should listen to me. They brought her up, and Hatzalah told me to be prepared that she's going to die within the hour. And I remember holding her hand and telling her, tonight is Chanukah. I said, I'm going to make a Shechianu on the menorah, on Chanukah, and on you. And she rallied and she lived to live through Chanukah. She lived to see another granddaughter born on Chanukah, my Dvoris Chayela. They were going to call her already Miriam Libby. They were planning to call her Miriam Libby. And when my wife rallied, they instead called her Chaya, that she was still alive. Shechianu is a very big thing. You know, we have another opportunity when we say Moedim D'Rabbanan. And we say, Hashem, al shechi yisanu v'kiyamtanu. You give me life and you establish me. Kein t'chayenu skaymeinu. Continue to give me life and continue to establish me. But a Shechianu is a big thing. You know what Ramila says about Shechianu? Ramila says a great thing about Shechianu. He says that one of the lessons of Shechianu, he says this in the Aguda, is that people are always living, what's going to be next? Oh, what am I going to do for the summer? How am I going to spend this coming Sukkot? People are always living. We're going on a vacation in August. He says, Shechianu v'kiyamanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. Live for now. Enjoy now. Enjoy the moment. I got carried away over here. We have in this week's Parsha Tzitzis. We got to talk about Tzitzis. We have 10 minutes to talk about Tzitzis. V'asalahem Tzitzis. So the Rekanti, the great Rekanti, Rekanti says, why is Tzitzis in the Parsha of the Meraglim, of the spies? Why is it next to it? So Rekanti says that when people speak Lashon Hara, and a group of people speak Lashon Hara, they create malachim roim. They create evil angels. And from that kadri of evil angels are created mazikin, are created damaging forces that cause damage all around. And Hashem gave us two protections from it. He gave us mezuzah. That's why it says mezuzah's missing one vav. So it's supposed to read zos maves. It causes death to move away. And what about when you're not in a house, you don't have a mezuzah? Then he gave us the protection of tzitzis. Tzitz. Hashem tzitz. Hashem looks after us. And he says that the protection of the mezuzah and the tzitzis protects us from these forces created by the Lashon Hara in the world. The Tashbats, the Heilige Tashbats, the Tashbats is known as saying that every time you look at your tzitzis, you're mekayim a mitzvah of a re'isa ma'isai. So you should look at tzitzis. Did you look at your tzitzis today? So every time you look at tzitzis, you're mekayim the mitzvah of re'isa ma'isai. Tashbat says that the tzitzis are like, he calls it chagura shel hatzala. He calls it a life belt. It's a life vest. He says because when a person wears tzitzis, the Shechina is with him. It's interesting, I'll tell you. And he says that's pshat. The Rekanti says that's pshat. B'tzel knafecha yechesoyin. In the shadow of your skirts, you will be protected. That refers to the kanfei bigdayim, to the tzitzis. There's a yalkid mochiri. It's a type of collection of midrashim. It says, if you look in by the Yamsuf, it says v'amayim lahem choyma defective vav. It's written ches memei, not ches vav memei. So the Medrash says v'amayim lahem choyma, the waters were raging against them because Micha brought through the Yam, the pesel Micha, the idol of Micha. But this Yalka says more than that. Although the Bnei Yisrael shechted the Korban Pesach, remember for a century they were worshipping idol. And it says they still had Bam Tachtenu, they still had idols with them. They were hedging their bets. In case they're going out in the desert, who knows what's going to happen. They brought their idols with them. So Ma'amayim Lohem Chema, the water was raging. But the Malach Gabriel came and said, no, split for them. B'schus the Torah that they're going to get, from the right hand, the fiery Lord was people. B'schus the tefillin that they put on their left, the waters didn't drown them from the front because of the schus of the Milah. Geyser Yamsuf Ligzarim, for those that cut themselves, and the water behind them didn't drown them. B'schus the tefillin that they were going to wear. B'schus the tzitzis that would be in back of us. We have two sets of tzitzis behind us. Tzitzis is a very great protection. You know, people are driving a car, they don't want to get rear-ended. Tzitzis is a big protection. It's a big protection. You're talking about that it's the Tashbat says it's a life vest because he says that when a person wears tzitzis, the Shechina is with him. I'll tell you an interesting Magen Avram that we could practice right away. Magen Avram. The Magen Avram which is one of the premier Pirushim on Shulchan Aruch. The Magen Avram writes in Hilchas Kiddush Levana. He quotes the Arizal that after finishing Levana, I want to remember to do this, that after finishing Kiddush Levana, you should look at your tzitzis. So according to the Tashbat, it's very easy. It's very easy. Why? Because Tashbat says that when you wear it, it's like a life vest and the Shechina is with you. And it says when we go out to do Kiddush Levana, we're mekabel pnei Shechina. Right? It says, afilu even if a person is not doesn't one time a month. That's why one of the reasons why we do it on Motzei Shabbos is because we're dressed in our Shabbos-tika clothing. And I have the benefit over here that when I hear that this Kiddush Levana, I could run up to my closet and clap on my Shabbos-tika kapata. But that's the idea of, because you're Mekab Pnei Ashchina. But Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank says something else. What do we say in Kiddush Levana? In Kiddush Levana we say that it should come the time that Hashem is what's the lashon? Yiratzon l'fanecha l'malois pegimas halavana. You should fill the blemish of the levana. V'yeha or halavana ka'orachama, and the light of the levana should be like the light of the sun. What's going to happen then? Then there's no night. Why don't we have a mitzvah tzitzis in the night? Because it says Uri'isem Ha'isai, right? But in the future, when we're going to have a sun even in the night, so then we'll have a mitzvah tzitzis even in the night. So that's why after saying the Yiratzon, we look at our tzitzis to show that we hope will come the time soon will there be a mitzvah tzitzis even at night. This is the great Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank. There's a Gemara in Kiddushin on Daf Lamed Zayin. We got to hurry. Oh, you got to hurry. We're running out of time. Well, it says in Kiddushin Daf Lamed Zayin, it says in the pasuk, "Bonim atem laHashem Elokeichem." You are children to Hashem. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Bisman she'yisrael loitzer etzag nishal makom kriyim bonim loyaisin ratzon shel makom." If they don't do the will of Hashem, they're not called bonim. Rabbi Meir says, no. Even when we don't do the will of Hashem, we're still considered bonim. The Rashba says that even though the Gemara in Eruvin says Rabbi Yehuda v'Rab Meir halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda, here the halacha is like Rab Meir, that even if we don't do the Ratzon Hashem, we're still considered bonim. Comes along the Ben Ish Chai, and the Ben Ish Chai says that we have on each corner we have 8 threads and 5 knots. That's 13. 13 times 4 is 52. That's Gematria Ben. The 4 tzitzis represents all kinds of children. Maybe we could add Chacham, Rasha, Tam, and Eini Adel Isho, but it represents children. And the ones that are behind us are the people, the children that are behind, that are wayward, but they're still considered Ben. That's the message of the tzitzis. And Ben Ish Chai says it's a skula to have a son, to have a nice talis. I wanted to add to this that there's a minig that the shver, the future father-in-law, buys a talis for the chassan. And that's very good now because he's getting a new son. And that's my talis was bought by my new shver. I have a new special talis was bought by my shver. They asked the Chavetz Chaim for a skula to remember your learning. How do you remember your learning? Everybody grapples with that. I'm going to learn Bava Basra now. How am I going to remember? Rabbi say tomorrow night, Bava Basra. Tomorrow night, Bava Basra, 5 to 9. Zoomdaf.com. Passcode 914408. Zoomdaf.com. Zoomdaf.com. 5 to 9. Bava Basra, you got to be in it to win it. So, you know what the Chavetz Chaim said? You want to remember your learning? Lo yisasuru achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem asher atem zonim achreihem leman tizkuru. Don't look at not sneeze things. If you're lo yisasuru achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem, then leman tizkuru. That's a Chavetz Chaim. I was there when they asked my Rebbe, Rav Moshe. They asked him, how do you remember your learning? He said an interesting thing. He said, what's the first thing that you remembered? So I said, I once touched when I was a little child a heater, and I still remember it. I was 2. He says, you know why? Because it made a big impression upon you. if your learning makes a big impression upon you, you'll remember it. That's what Ramosha said. I think about it. I only heard Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky speak once, but what he said I never forgot. It made a big impression upon me. Made a big impression. I would add also that Rav Rashi in Avodah Zarah says, have in mind in das that Hashem should give you the strength to remember, because it says L'ukmei girsa, the Mar Megillah, L'ukmei girsa, to remember learning. That's Siyata D'Shmaya. We'll talk more about it for the Shabbos table. I want to at this moment thank again Berish Kesselman for sponsoring the Shiur. Next week's Shiur, already Shlach, next week's Shiur, Kairach, will be broadcasted up from the mountains from South Fallsburg. So if you want to sponsor that, we're looking for a sponsor for the first Catskills broadcast, 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. Thank you all for joining us. Have a good evening and a good Shabbos.